Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Clayton Allen, the U.S. Director with Eurasia Group. Clayton, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, we saw an almost trade war happen and then be avoided this weekend between the United States and Colombia. If you blink, you missed it. So I want to talk about exactly what happened. First, Colombia said they would turn away military flights from the United States that carried deported migrants to the country. President Donald Trump then announced the U.S. would slap Colombia with tariffs and sanctions, and Colombia responded by then threatening with retaliatory tariffs. Then the White House said that Colombia, quote, has agreed to all of President Trump's terms, including the unrestricted acceptance of all illegal aliens from Colombia returned from the United States, including on U.S. military aircraft, without limitation or delay. And because of this, planned tariffs were then put on pause, quote, unless Colombia fails to honor this agreement. What are your thoughts on that back and forth?
Well, first, you did a great job summarizing the events. I think the summary in some ways takes almost as long as the trade war did to play out entirely. The takeaways from this are, I think, pretty direct. First, this is clearly indicative of Trump's approach to diplomacy over the next 4 years. I think if you're a country that has a dispute with the U.S., expect to have tariffs hanging over you as sort of a catch-all threat. This is the one-size-fits-all tool of policymaking, diplomacy, coercion, leverage that Trump turns to, and he's going to turn to it even for issues that are unrelated to economic matters. Immigration, you would normally respond to that with diplomatic cables, interactions between governments. Trump went immediately to do what I want or you get tariffed and sanctioned. So that's takeaway number one. Takeaway number two, Colombia stands out a little bit regionally here. Most other countries in Latin America are relatively on board. They're taking repatriation flights. There has been some controversy around that, notably in Brazil. And I would expect that continues. You will get some pushback, but countries are generally cooperative. Colombia, specifically President Petro, stands out as someone who has a lot of personal incentive to not want to go along with Trump. Petro's a former revolutionary. He's not a guy to sit back and let you dictate to him what he's going to do. He's going to push back, and he did here. It didn't play out with Colombia blocking the action, but he saved a little bit of face. He showed that he's not going to just bend to Trump unquestioningly. But ultimately, the threat against Colombia and the resolution here reinforces that we expect regional cooperation on deportation efforts kind of moving forward from the rest of the region.
What do you think that this does with the United States' relationship with Colombia and other countries? Because it seems like the world almost was put on notice that if, debates between Trump and other countries, immediately tariffs can be number one there in the negotiating tactics. So what does this mean with our relationships abroad?
I think it reinforces what a lot of countries had feared, I think, when you look at what the negotiations with the Trump administration were going to look like. This is kind of in line with what we laid out as our base case for a Trump administration. He does love tariffs. I think that if you came into this expecting that somehow he had changed his stripes, I think this proved you wrong. In terms of the U.S.'s relations with Colombia, it does nothing good to them. I think that this compounds issues which have sort of dominated for a long time. The U.S. has sort of given under focus or a less attention than it should to Latin America more broadly. Now, that's probably going to change under Secretary of State Rubio, but certainly threats like this are going to complicate efforts to build cooperation between some of the regional partners. And Colombia is a pretty important one, given the importance of the anti-drug campaigns of, the current dating back 40 years plus. And it's also its position as a close neighbor to Venezuela, where Venezuela is probably going to be a key foreign policy concern for the U.S., or at least specifically for Rubio moving forward.
And my last question to you is our border czar, Tom Homan, essentially said that using military planes to deport migrants in this country illegally is, quote, sending a strong signal to the world, our borders closed. Does this tough message impact our relationship with other countries throughout the world? What does that look like?
So I think the sort of the takeaway that you can look at how it was received in Brazil. Brazil has been generally cooperative, generally on board with repatriation flights, moving Brazilian migrants back to their country of origin. Doing so on a military aircraft drew a tremendous amount of backlash because it was perceived as, somewhat overly aggressive and it's, a mistreatment of those migrants. I wasn't on the flight. I don't have any direct knowledge of that. I think it changes the way that the U.S. is being perceived. It certainly presents a much more forceful and much more, I think, antagonistic relationship or antagonistic position for the US. So I would agree with Tom Hammond. It's sending a clear signal. And I think it's the signal that the administration wants to put across, which is this is a very different game. This is a very different approach to border security than which has come before under either Democratic or Republican administrations. And that enforcement is going to be a top priority, and they're going to follow through on their threats.
And do you think the rest of the world is receiving this message now? Because it's only been 1 or 2 weeks in the Trump administration.
I would certainly think that the rest of the world is receiving the message. This is the first 2 weeks of Trump 2.0. So it's building on the experience of 4 years of governance between 2017 and 2021, as well as a multi-year campaign where Trump was pretty clear on where his political focus lies. I think people have been perhaps a little bit surprised. I know we have been a little surprised by the severity and speed of some of Trump's actions, but I think that message is coming across loud and clear.
Clayton Allen, per usual, I appreciate your insight today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.